The stair rose in a slow, spiraling hush, the sort that stole breath not through swiftness but through the constant insistence of small steps. Mara had learned to count them on other nights, when fear of forgetting the number felt safer than thinking of where she climbed. She counted the stretch of her calves, the roughness of each shallow turn, the way the torch brackets thinned as the air sharpened. The Prince's Tower had old stone that held the day's heat above the city, and held it close even as night slid into the harbor. In the narrow throat of the stair that heat tasted of iron and stale lavender, a perfume that belonged to ladies who no longer came to court. Her ewer was copper, polished so carefully she could see her own mouth when she looked down. She had not meant to, but finding herself in the reflection had become a habit, to check if she wore the right face for the guard, a face that belonged to an insignificant girl with sure hands. The water inside the ewer shivered with each step. Mara soothed it by the old trick of moving her wrist in the opposite rhythm of her feet. A brewer's daughter learned to carry without spill, or she was sent away from the vats. She had not been sent away. At the landing near the door, the hush surrendered to the hum of something that was not sound. It pressed at her skin rather than her ears. It made the small hairs on her forearms choose a direction and lift. The keyhole black in the heavy oak seemed deeper than on other nights, a tunnel dug into the door rather than pierced through. The guard was new, a tall man with tired eyes and the careful, paternal manner of someone who had gathered his share of fallen drinkers from tavern floors. The scar on his upper lip haloed his mouth in a permanent half-smile. "You're late," he told her, though she was not. "I am not," she said softly, because a quiet denial was more convincing than a loud one. He shrugged with his one shoulder that had a knot of muscle, the other too stiff. "Time runs oddly up here. Set it down." The prince asked it be brought in. He pretended to consider. He had a habit of tapping his knuckles softly against the pommel at his hip as he thought, and the sound of leather against leather was almost kind. "Go in, then. Don't look too long at what you shouldn't." Mara did not ask what that was. She pressed her shoulder to the door. The wood was warm as a person, and slipped inside like a cloud of steam. The chamber's windows looked east and south and thought very little of the walls between them. Moonlight had found a way in and drew silver ladders across the tiles, across the skirts of curtained chairs and the feet of tables crowded with maps. A single candle burned on the long table near the window, and its flame was wrong. It was too steady and too dark at the edges, a flame made not of melted bees but of midnight, and yet it did not smoke. It made the maps look as if they were dipped in glass. It made the writing glow. Prince Viserys bent over a parchment so thin she could see his hand through it. The hair at his temples was white rather than silver, though he was not old, and the rest was braided simply and gathered with a single black ribbon. He wore a robe that only the daring tailors made for men, too soft and too fine for a war season, a robe like smoke held together by a clasp shaped like a bay leaf. He did not look up when she entered. He did not need to, because the hum that had met her on the stair eased when she crossed the threshold, as if acknowledging her arrival. "Set it by the candle," he said, the words fallen lightly, each with its own place as if put down on shelves, careful not to let it kiss the flame. "It would be burned," she said without thinking, evasive as the water across her wrist. "It would be unwritten," he replied, the slightest smile threading otherwise unamused lips. She set the ewer where he pointed, far from the candle with the wrong light. On the table lay a map she had never seen before. Her father had a tattered coastal chart he'd sometimes unroll after the brewhouse was swept, and she'd pore over it, teach herself the names with her fingertip. Massey's Hook, Driftmark, the Gullet, the black stitches that marked shoal. The map under this candle showed a place that was all teeth. It looked like a cracked jawbone ringed with tiny islands like broken molars and canines in spitting rows. The script was spider-fine, and the soundless hum seemed to spill from the ink, across her knuckles, into the bones. She swallowed and looked away. A dragon skull had been moved up from wherever the city kept its terrors. It watched the room from the shadow of a curtain. Its eye socket seemed to track the candle. The candle itself was carved of obsidian and faceted like a gem. It gave back no reflection in the copper ewer, which unnerved her more than any staring skull. It was taller than a man's forearm and slimmer than her wrist. In all the nights she had been sent up here, she had never seen it waver, though she thought flames had the right to waver. You did not spill. He had not looked yet, and still he knew. Only later would she realize he had watched her approach by the pooling of the wrong light on the floor. Yes, my prince. You always hold too tight to the handle at the top, he said. It's your left hand that steadies it. The brewer's trick, Mara said. If I tell the other girls, I will have no coin for the telling. He glanced up then. His eyes were pale the way winter water could be pale at dawn. He had bled a bit in the cuticle of his right thumb. The blood had dried to a dark pinprick, and he lifted it to his mouth and worried it with small, thoughtful teeth. Do not tell the other girls. You may charge for the secret. Secrets should have prices. She nodded and forgot to call him my prince again. The humming pressed at her again when she reached for the carafe. She poured him a cup, the tin cup that lived beside the candle and had acquired a ring of faint scorches, as if the wrong light had been testing it for weakness all this time. She could smell the river from the window, the way it carried salt and rot from the bay and metal from the city's thousands of nails and stray coins. You have made a study of maps, he said, as if it were something he had read along the edge of her face. A brewer's daughter does not map, she tried, and then, because she sensed that he allowed truths like a gardener allowed certain volunteer herbs, she said, I have looked at my father's chart where he marks the shoals with dots and leaves his thumbprint by Maidenpool. Your map is not ours. It is no one's, he said softly. Where ownership is a lie, maps are truer. What do you think it shows? A place that had never learned to sit still. He smiled then, not at her but at her answer. He smiled at the correctness of it. It is ash given shape, he said. Shorelines as a record of a memory, or the memory of a record. All maps are prayer, did you know? You could fold this into a lantern and put a candle in it, and you would be guiding a ship through the darkness with nothing more than hope made paper. He took a sip. I do not recommend it. Ships should have better than hope. The hum changed a shade, as if somewhere a door had opened inside the candle that was not inside the room. Mara felt a cough rising, a clench at the base of her throat, as if she had been too long near lying, and she pushed it down as a second trick from the brewery taught her. Control the breath, control the cough. When she looked up, Prince Viserys' gaze had moved past her, to the skull in the curtains, and beyond it to whatever he saw when he allowed himself to see. Go, he said. Let the guard know that if he hears me speaking alone, I am not alone. Mara did not ask to whom the other half of the conversation belonged. The ewer grew lighter with the stare. She stepped carefully, because the edge of the hum clung to her sleeves, and she could not bring it into the noisy hallway where the other girls laughed in tired laughter and fought over cherries stolen from the kitchens. The guard did not ask her any questions. He looked the same sort of tired as the men who kept watch over barrels of wine in the autumn and kept one ear for the sound of a cracked stave. He knew what it was to listen for failure. He speaks to the skull, Mara said. She felt a sudden silliness rise up in her and waited for it to pass. And the candle. Princes are allowed old bones and light, the guard said. I will not interfere. He told me to say he is not alone. He is not, the guard said, and for the first time that night he did not smile at anything. There are ghosts up here. Some have names. Some do not. She had a bed beneath the eaves of the lesser hall and a blanket that smelled faintly of cumin. She folded herself in and listened to the breathing of the other sleeping girls. One of them had a whistle in her nose that made each exhale sound like a tiny question. When sleep came, it was like dropping through a trapdoor into a cool cellar. If the hum followed, it did not make itself known. In the morning, the city roused itself with bells that disagreed with one another. The first gray light slid down the slate tiles and pooled in the gullies. Men with brooms pushed it along with leaves and pleading words. Ships tugged at their lines like dogs eager for the shore. Then the city remembered it had a war in its throat, and the calls changed. It was not the shriek of burning or the clamor of conquest. It was the sound of counting and inventory. A war made the coiners happy and the coopers nervous. It made pigeons multiply, and pigeons were easy to ring. A boy ran and stopped and ran again with a message clutched like a lifeline. The butcher on the corner sharpened his knives without customers, his arm remembering the motion when the mind did not yet have a reason to move. Under all these ordinary sounds lay the rumor of horse and steel far away, as if the streets were running river water under their stones. Maester Theomore held the most modest chair in the Red Keep and made a throne of it. He was neither young nor very old, not sharp and not dull, which is to say he had arrived, after the peculiar humblings of a life on a chain, at a steadiness that neither flattered the swift nor offended the slow. He had a mole on his left cheek that he touched when he thought he was thinking, and when he actually thought, he forgot to touch it. His hair had once been the yellow of spun flax and was now the pale of unrinsed whey. He had known boys who would make a jest of that, but his were grown to be men who spoke to him only in their need or their pity. He received the summons to the prince's tower with the refrain of a headache and a little agreeable terror. Theomore was of a mind that terror had its use. It was like the vinegar you splashed in a pot to keep sweet from cloying. The prince's seal had been pressed too hard, so the warped shell cracked when Theomore lifted it with his thumbnail. The message inside was written in the hand of someone who loved to make loops and then strangle them. Theomore smoothed the page, set off the headache with a swallow of hot water, and climbed. The guard outside the door offered him a look carefully unweighted by opinion. This was not the old guard. This one had a face like a worried goat and a set of keys impressive enough to be its own sort of chain. "Do I go in at once?" Theomore asked, though he could hear the motion inside, the sound like glass tapping at glass, and did not wish to interrupt if interruption would unmake something he would later be asked to repair. "Go," said the goat-faced guard, and did not move to help him with the heavy door. Inside, the room had the air of a place that had not only been lived in but argued with. The windows were open to a morning breeze and a pale sky. The maps had shifted sin. See, last night's rumor reached the kitchens. The skull had moved its angle, too, though Theomore suspected it was the table beneath the skull that had been nudged, not the ancient bone itself. The obsidian candle burned with excellent health. He disliked it immediately, because he had read about them and made a tidy stack of skepticism to protect his mind from the temptation of believing too much. Prince Viserys was not at the table. He was at the window, bare feet cooling on the stone, the robe of last night replaced by a shirt with pleats fine enough to have driven 3 good seamstresses into madness. His hand rested against the stone the way a child rests a hand on the neck of a hound. It could have been affection or merely the recognition that something alive as stone needed touching sometimes. "Maester," he said, as if he had been practicing the word and was pleased to find that it fit his mouth in the morning. "Your Grace," Theomore said. He had never been casual with forms. A careless address had cost him a tooth once, and the slightest lisp had worn at his dignity ever since. "Maps," the prince said, not as an invitation but as an accurate account of what the room contained. "How far back does your chain let you remember?" "Chains do not carry memory," Theomore said, because he could not resist setting truths in front of powerful men when it seemed they might listen. "They carry willingness. But if you mean books, farther back than is healthy, and not as far as we all pretend." Viserys smiled that brief thread of smile and returned to the table. "I want you to read a thing with me, not because you were there when it was written, but because you can hear the wind that blew between the lines." He tapped a scroll tied with a soft worn ribbon. Theomore recognized the crackle and sheen of it. It was older than half the lies about the 7 kingdoms. "Assistance," the prince said, "not assent." "I will read," Theomore said, and put on the tiny spectacles that he pretended disliking because he had been told women found them endearing. He had not had reason to care for many years. The script was in the square, careful hand of a clerk trained in a city that took pride in its accuracy. It was a copy of a copy, as everything old was. Theomore read aloud as he untied and unrolled, hands automatically gentle the way a midwife's hands are gentle in the face of skin and inevitability. The words were high Valyrian, crisp and dry and stubborn. He coaxed them into the room. He never could tell if Prince Viserys understood the older forms. The prince nodded at the right places, frowned at the right others, and never asked the wrong questions, which was the only measure that mattered. And the eldest magister stood upon the cliff at Orith, and he unrolled his undersleeve to let the winds see the lines, and he said that all shadows have parents. Theomore translated, smoothing his thumb along the crack in the scroll where the scribe had been too vigorous with his tardy carefulness, and that there is a shade that does not belong to the sun, and that to ask for it is to owe it a debt that cannot be weighed, only counted in days. He said that the debt in days may be taken from a king or from a city, but that the shade would prefer to have it from a bloodline. He said that once it has eaten ash, it cannot be made to spit it out. Viserys' thumb had that dot of dried blood still clinging to it. Theomore wanted to hand him a damp cloth. Then he wanted to slap his own wrist for the thought. "You have read this before," Theomore said. "An earlier copy," the prince replied, "and a letter written by a man who thought himself clever for writing a letter about it. His cleverness bled through the ink, and the important parts were smudged. Smudges have saved more lives than we know," Theomore murmured. "I do not want lives saved," Viserys said without any heat, merely a statement of the direction of his thought. "I want the rebellion finished. I want the river to return to carrying fish and trade instead of soldiers, ours or theirs. But if it must carry soldiers, let it carry none who raise blades against us." Theomore met the prince's eye in the way of a man who had learned to do it sparingly. "Prince Rhaegar rides to meet them, and he will meet them," Viserys agreed. He looked at the skull the way a hungry man looks at bread he does not like but will eat. "But he is not a river. He is a man. I am not a river either. I have to ask the river to be a river." "The river has no ears," Theomore said, and realized how stupid it sounded the moment he said it aloud. Viserys' smile returned as briefly as a gull across a parapet. Once, men were different about what they believed a river could listen to. He touched the obsidian candle in a way that showed he had lost the childhood habit of warning himself away from flames. The flame did not tremble under his fingertips' shadow. It swallowed it. Once, it was not pride to ask for help from the older dark. It was merely another kind of humility, the kind that knows you cannot bind water in a fist. "I do not recommend," Theomore said carefully. "Humility in a form that will devour the hand that holds it." Viserys nodded as if he had expected the answer and stored it in a drawer for later. "I need a translation of the last 2 columns. The copy I saw in Pentos stopped just as the scribe grew frightened. He wrote a farewell to his mother as if his mother would ever see it, and then he stopped writing altogether. This one seems to have more of a stomach." Theomore saw that it did. He saw that the last 2 columns had the ink a shade darker than the rest, and while this could mean many things, a newer pot of ink, a room with more windows, he felt it meant simply what it meant. That someone had wanted these last lines to be darker so they would be seen more easily in poor light. "I will read it to you," he said. "I would like you to write it too, Vis." Ares added, in the low tongue, "In my hand, such as you can make it." Theomore still held his breath upon hearing that. He tried not to. He tried to be a man who received such requests with the same plainness as he received a loaf from a baker. But he had watched other men sign letters for kings and lords. He had seen what it felt like to think for another hand. He had gotten his lisp because he had not refused quickly enough to be useful, and too quickly to be forgiven. He did not care to be either useful or forgiven now, but he could not decline. The war had made the princely tower feel like a bowl the city drank from. If water went missing, someone would go thirsty. "I will do it," he murmured. The candle watched. The skull watched. He pretended only the prince watched. Down in the city, the Alchemists' Guild had made an early peace with the morning. Karas, who was not old but had a back that behaved as if he was, arrived before the others to check the cooling pans and the tall narrow-necked flasks in which things did not foam so much as brewed. He spoke to the jars as he would to restive children. Heat was a child. Most of the men of the guild had learned to speak of it in gentling terms. Wisdom Lucan had said often that heat was the only god they trusted, and that they trusted it by attending to its tantrums. Now Karas attended. He touched the cooling troughs. He leaned his face into the small of a vent to feel the ghost of last night's breath. He lifted a lid and smelled the ghost of pine. He hated leaving lids off too long. He had been taught to fear the way certain vapors slipped into certain dry measures and turned them into something else entirely. He had a group of 5 apprentices who followed him past doors that were names more than doors. The Wolf, the Eye, the Tower. Their true names they wrote only once every 13 months, when a tally was made of what work had been done and how much work was waiting. The message had come from the prince. Red cord tied in a knot that meant it was to be burned after reading. Kara's had burned it. The prince wanted black fire. That was not their phrase. It had been used in other texts, and men who used it often misnamed what they desired. They wanted power they could see without light. They wanted to feel that something burned at their command even in the dark, and perhaps because of it. Kara's had seen men ask for that, and he had seen them get it, but not in a manner that made them feel at ease. "Can they do black fire?" one of his apprentices asked, putting the last of the bay stones in the hearth mouths and closing the iron lids. "What would you call what the prince asks?" "I would call it smoke," Kara said. "And then I would call it a wind. And then I would call it a sickness. And then I would call it nothing at all. Names cannot be quickly made for things that old. We are not the ones who make them, either. We fetch. We coax. We say please. We say thank you. If something comes and sits in the bowl and looks at us, we do not name it. We politely pretend it has always had a name. It is safer." The boy made a face because boys hated to be told to pretend. Kara's knew that and did not amend his statement. He had learned to leave some stubbornness in his apprentices so that they would listen to their own stubbornness at midnight when a valve began to shudder and he was far away. Wisdom Lucan arrived late with his mind half elsewhere, as it always was for the first hour after he woke. His beard had been perfumed with a sprig of rosemary and an optimism Kara's envied. He asked after the prince's message, and when Kara's described it, he nodded and said, "They have a candle burning up there." "As if we did not know," Kara's murmured. "It has changed the air. I wake from a drop of sleep and know without rising from the cot that someone has taught a flame to be quiet." "I do not mind quiet flames," Lucan said mildly. "Anything shy I trust. Boasting is for men and soldiers. I will send up the green jars the prince asks for. The old kitchens know how to handle them. Or knew once. Old hands are changed," Kara said, and thought of how the boy had looked at him. "Everything is changed by a war. And by peace," the wisdom answered. "We forget that part. There is no spilling done in peace, we tell ourselves. And yet I fear peace is when the most spilling is done. Men have new time to make terrible things and call them beautiful." He inhaled, and his beard moved with the breath. "Find the jars with the white thread. Not those with no thread, not those with 3. White thread. The prince wants a certain temperament. The white thread jars are patient. They will not misbehave if the man who carries them stops to tie his shoe. Gods bless the patient," Kara said, because the words were a ritual and their emptiness made them easier. He went to fetch the jars. On the road that had turned itself into an army, a man named Tom darted his tongue between his 2 front teeth and tasted salt and dust. The salt was from cured meat let be too long in his mouth. Dust came with the act of walking. He had spent the first months of the marching learning to accept that his body was made of road and that you were better off if you did not spit it out. He'd been a carter, which did not teach you to walk so much as it taught you to bend and lift. He found the bending and lifting familiar and the walking unfamiliar until familiarity came in and made a tent of his bones. He did not love the men he marched with. He did not hate them either. Love and hate were stories told by the men who rode at the front, men who needed their words to stick to other men's ribs. Tom had no words that stuck. He had a name and a way of slipping through alleys and between barrels. He had a wife in a village far from anything that mattered and a son who no longer ran at him when he turned into the lane, because absence teaches boys to be careful of joy. The banners they bove gave shade where they snapped. Shade among men who smelled of leather and rain-damp wool was not a thing to scorn. When a breath of wind found its way down between the ranks and slipped across Tom's neck, he shivered. He did not mean to, but bodies do not always consult minds about what they intend. The men spoke softly because they were tired of hearing themselves, and because men who bellow tend to lose what matters most in their throats. They spoke of small things, where the bread had gone that morning that had been promised the night before, the man who had sung well and then died, leaving his song behind as a kind of camp ghost, the rumor that the river ahead had a bend that looked like a throat cut on a butcher's board. Tom did not believe rumors that tried to nudge his imagination. He preferred the ones that were paper flat. There is a ford. The ford is better than men say. Near midday they stopped beneath a stand of ash that shivered though there was no wind. Tom lay on his back and watched the leaves ignore the stillness and thought that perhaps trees were better at knowing the truth of the air than men were. When he closed his eyes, he saw the river anyway. He saw it lift 1,000 small faces to the sun and slap them shut again with a sound like the crowd at a fair when the clown drops his trousers. He smiled before he could stop himself, and a man nearby nudged him with a boot. "You'll smile now, and then bite leather later." Tom opened one eye. The man had a scar that made his right nostril flare even when his face was at rest. "If there is leather," he said, "I have gotten to using willow twig." The man laughed with the assurance of someone whose life was other men's jokes. Then he lay down beside Tom and put his hat over his face. It was what passed for kindness. Near the Blackwater, the fishermen had learned to read the tide in the faces of the gulls. When the gulls' voices took on a certain cracked brittleness, less quarrel, more comment, the men said the tide had thoughts of turning. Jorel, who had a boat of his own and had named it Minora in a small act of foolishness that he privately cherished, spat over the side and watched the spit slip away faster than it would have in spring. The river was eager today. It wanted to tumble into the mouth of the bay and be something else entirely. He did not mind the river's moods. He minded when its edges changed. You learned the edges in winter, when the ice taught you where the current ran hardest, and then in summer the edges had the audacity to pretend they had never been where they had been. He sat with his hands on his knees and the sun on his shoulders and listened to his own bones settle like ballast. Nora had died 3 winters ago, and that was a kind of ballast, too. He hoped there would never be a day when he did not feel the shift she had made in him. The morning had tasted of ordinary things. The burnt edge of the barley crust he had eaten with cheese, the salt on his thumb when he licked it to count coppers in the market, the heat that grew lazy about his neck. Only when the wind turned, it brought with it a thing he could not taste. It was an absence. He leaned toward it like a man leaning toward a voice that is almost too far away to hear. "Nora," he said aloud, because he had no better name for the sensation than the name of someone he trusted. "Do you feel that?" He sometimes forgot to ask questions in a way that others could not answer. He had lonely habits. Yet now the gulls cut their chatter as if a hand had come down over their mouths. They did not close their wings. They simply forgot to be noisy. Jorel could hear men speaking on other boats as if they were in the next hatch. He could hear a man urinating against wood, the exact leash of the stream and the brief wet applause. He felt his own heart as clearly as he had felt it when he had nearly drowned as a boy and had wondered, in the mild wonder of near death, how his own body could make such an insistent noise. At the Red Keep, the small council gathered, and each man brought with him the weight of his own private weather. They gathered in a room that had tried to teach itself to be hushed and had succeeded. Candles made the table into a constellation. Beyond the windows, the city's hum had a frayed, uneasy contentment. The king would not come, which was a relief and an insult, as most absences by the powerful are. The Grand Maester folded his sleeves and unfolded them again and considered whether to open with a pronouncement about supply, and then considered whether using the word husbandry would draw a laugh from the wrong mouth. The eunuch watched him with the remarkable gentleness of men who see very far and frequently. "The prince has taken counsel," the Grand Maester began, meaning by this that the prince had taken advice of a sort that surely, he would find inferior in a moment if he would only listen to older men with older chains. "He asks, well." He picked up a letter and put it down. The letter did not weigh what it should in his hand. He wished it did. "The alchemists will send certain jars to the tower." "They would send their hearts in jars to the tower," the eunuch said softly, and no one said that the eunuch should not speak, because they all found his voice useful. Do the jars have threads of white? The Grand Maester's eyebrows wished to be disturbed. They do. Then we are in the presence of patience, the eunuch murmured. I am pleased. Patience is my favorite servant. Have you sent birds? Asked a lord with a handsome hand who did not sign letters with it so much as he placed it on the table and let its beauty sign for him. Banners gather in the riverlands. The storm lord eats too little and drinks too much and still finds the energy to beat the world into shape. The wolf boy is behind him with the rest of the north. If we are to ask anyone to be patient, perhaps it should be the river. Rivers are. Very patient, the eunuch said. It is how they kill you. They are too patient and then, all at once, they choose their moment. We will choose for them, the Lord said, though not forcefully. His voice had a velvet lethargy. The prince chooses for them. The prince asks for choice, the Grand Maester said, and heard his own voice betray him with the thinnest thread of relief. To say the prince asked rather than ordered made the ask bearable. He had taken a liking to this particular prince. It embarrassed him to admit it in the mirror when he shaved. In the sept that had survived 3 fires and a collapse and the arrival of a painted idol that had scandalized a retired knight into leaving his candle unminded, Septa Elaine taught children to read each their own name. She had learned that a child without a name in his mouth was a child who would not lift a hand to take hold of a rope when it was thrown. She coaxed their fingers along their letters and gave them the confidence to mispronounce them until they were properly pronounced. She had hands like spades and was proud of them. She dug small holes in the hard ground of ignorance and put seeds there. She felt the tremor in the air when one boy, whose name was Gil and who could say it only if he whispered, put his hand on an A and sighed with the relief of recognition. She froze, as if freezing would let the sensation pass her by unobserved. It did not. It found the seams of the stained glass. It found the old crack in St. Winifred's ankle that no plasterer had convincingly mended. It found her ear. She had heard tales of the doom like any woman who had read more than one book. She had learned, the way one learns a psalm, that there were places in the world where the ground had remembered how to be angry. But this was not that feeling. This was not anger. This was attentiveness. She had the absurd sense of standing in a room while a very tall person stooped to listen to what she might say. She said to the children, "We will stop for today." She smiled so that they would not believe there was danger. A child named Orlane did not believe in danger even when it knocked. She had been knocked so often that she had taken to treating the knocks as other boys might treat summer rain. Still, Orlane looked at her with an animal squint. "There will be bread in the yard," Septa Elaine lied. It would appear because kindness could make loaves appear in the way that the right sort of hard stare could make a man pay his rent. Run. Go. They went. Only after the last boy had tugged a friend through the door did Elaine allow herself to put a hand on the old carved septon at the back of the nave. The face had been smoothed by a century of women like her. The stone was warm. She realized she had expected it to be cold, which told her more than anything else did. She stood there, a woman with dirt under her nails and a quiet devotion to plain miracles, and murmured to a God who had listened to her foolishness before, "Be very careful how you listen today." In the prince's tower, the translations grew into a stack of paper that made Theomore's hand ache with the knowledge of its own work. He wrote in the prince's hand as requested, because there was no use to be gained in pretending otherwise. He had learned to mimic prettier men for better wages once, a half-life ago, and now the habit did not even taste of shame. He wrote the lines and translated as he went, whispering to himself after a while as if he had taken the prince's habit and put it on without asking. Viserys stood over the candle and did not stoop. It made Theomore admire his spine in a way that had nothing to do with politics. "And the shade requires an anchor," he read, tracing the careful line of the ancient scribe. "Not a body," he added softly, translating before the prince could ask. "Because it is not a living thing, not a place, for it is not a house. It needs the shape of a will. If too small a will, then it will flatten it. If too large a will, then it will sulk. If properly made for one another, shade and will, the thing that is summoned will attend and will not leave until politely dismissed or until it has eaten enough of what it came for." It likes ash, and it likes noise, and it likes water that moves as if in fear. Cannot abide hunger. If the will that holds it hungers, it will devour that hunger and make an animal of it. Viserys put his hand on the table beside the candle and splayed his fingers as if showing the length of them impressed him. And the debt in days? Counted, Theomore said. Not weighed, counted in days taken from a line. It is a cruel arithmetic, and the cruelest always are the easiest to reckon. There is nothing about how they are taken. I know how, Viserys said, and it surprised Theomore that he did not sound eager. He sounded like a man acknowledging a toll on a familiar road. I know what it means to owe and then to pay in a way no one sees until it has been paid. Theomore considered, out of the corner of his mind, what the king had taught his children without meaning to. Then he stopped considering because the candle wanted attention and he would not give it. He attended instead to the prince, because attending to men rather than to flames had kept him alive. There is also this, he read, reaching the last lines and resisting the urge to handle them more carefully than the earlier ones, because the temptation to reverence the end was one of those habits that could mislead you like a taste for sweet that made teeth rot. It says the shade is not an absence. It is a presence that undoes other presence. That men will call it a darkness because they cannot look into it, but it is a thing as definite as a tree or a hand. And that when it is gone, it leaves the sand heavy with a taste that is the opposite of salt. If it is dismissed courtesy, it will not resent. If it is left to go on, it will find its own ending. There are alwa, wise men who wish to leave things to find their own ending, Viserys said. They simply do not wish to be in the room when it happens. Theomore did not ask the prince which kind he wanted to be. By dusk, the guard outside the tower had changed twice, and the weary goat-faced man returned like a man who knows the smell of a particular stair and will return to it all his nights. Mara carried bread and broth up in a basket that announced itself as warmer than the stair liked. She had learned to bump it against her hip so that the heat would pass into her and become more useful. She had been raised to waste nothing, not even warmth. Tonight the hum met her again, and this time brought with it a burr along the edge of her teeth like the feeling of grinding them in bad dreams. He will not eat, the guard warned her, not unkindly. He will say he will and then forget. Then I will put the spoon in his hand, Mara said, in the stubborn tone she used when her father pretended to refuse medicine so that he might be tended more. He is not the first man to forget supper when looking at flames. When she entered, the candle noticed her. She knew it not by any physical change. The flame did not lean toward her as a dog leans toward a familiar knee. It simply altered the thickness of the air around her face. She pretended not to feel that. She went on about her business as she always had gone about her business, moving with a small neatness through spaces that did not advertise themselves as welcoming. The bread, she said. The broth. There is cut pear in the napkin. It's not our season for pears, but someone paid for it. Viserys glanced at the pear as if it might have come bearing tidings. Someone is always paying, he said. Sit. Share it with me so that there is less to pay for later. She did not sit. She stood by the chair and waited for him to put his hand on the spoon because men ate if you made them perform the mechanics of eating. She had known men to change their minds about meat when their fingers brushed it. She had known men to fall in love when their fingers brushed other fingers. She had also known men to punch. He took the spoon. He was careful with it, as he was careful with instruments that had uses he did not yet fully appreciate. He ate because his body demanded it and because a girl looked at him as if he would be forgiven for taking care of himself. Between spoonfuls he looked at the skull, and the candle, and the map that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had made new countries. Do you know what the river smells like at night? He asked her without warning. It was a question she had not expected to be expected to answer. It smells like a boy who has been made to wash, she said. Better than before, and it knows it, and still unwilling. He laughed with a grace she had not heard from any of the other men in the keep. You have named it well, he said, and she felt a surprising sort of joy fill her belly, which was ridiculous, because he had done nothing more than be amused. "It will smell like something else soon." "Like what?" "Like rain that does not fall," he said. "Like ink blown across a page and then spread with a hand. Like..." He paused and looked at the skull for assistance and received none. "Like the inside of a stone." Mara did not know what that smelled like. She kept her ignorance to herself. She thought instead of the way the prince had said ink, and how men who had learned to read late said it like a lover's name. Night slid its black belt around the city and tightened gently until doors were barred and lamps were lit. The stars were few and tired and had a cudgel of cloud leaned up against their wall. The Blackwater took the moon in and let it go as it pleased. In the camps along the Trident, the men who dreamed quickly and woke quickly, as if their bodies did not trust sleep enough to let it swallow them. In the prince's tower, Theomore set down his pen, flexed his hand until the ache changed into a species of guilt, and said, "It is done." Viserys did not say thank you. He nodded in a way that acknowledged more than thanks would have, because he understood that what had been done could not be undone by courtesy. He took the stack and laid it beside the candle. He did not put it close enough to singe the edges. He did not have the mind of a child playing with hearthsticks. He had the mind of a man who had learned from watching other men's minds spoil like milk. "Will you sleep?" Theomore asked, with the audacity to make it sound like an obligation. "No," Viserys said. He smiled the thread of a smile. "But you will." Theomore left. The guard outside the door looked as if he wished for a chair, and then looked ashamed for wishing for anything. Theomore wanted to put his hand on the man's shoulder and pin forgiveness there like a badge. He did not. He returned to his small chamber and drank the wine he had saved for good news. Viserys stood alone. Mara returned once more like a moth with a jug, then stood uncertain, then set it down and fled in such a manner that she believed herself brave for not truly running. He cast off his shoes and put his palms on the table, one on either side of the candle. The skull was a shadow behind him. In the window the river reflected a star and then swallowed it and then reflected it again, as if it were practicing. He did not speak any of the words Theomore had written for him the way a boy might speak a charm to keep nightmares under his bed. He did not enjoy recitation. He had known too many priests whose words had turned into the sound of flies. He spoke what came to him when he looked into the wrong light because he had learned that sometimes a man of his blood could recover a thing by willing its shape. It had been true of his house when the dragons lived. He did not have dragons. He had a candle made of the same stone as bad promises. It would be enough. He thought of a river. He thought of ash. He thought of a shadow that did not depend on the moon's position or his own. He thought of the shape of his will, and because no one ever tells princes they can be too small, he told himself, not too small. He told himself, not too large. He told himself, properly made for it. He spoke softly because softness is the best way to be heard. The candle made no more noise than a tear falling against silk. The wind outside snuck along the wall like a child who would be caught and wanted to be caught. In the streets, dogs laughed with the laughter dogs have when a baker drops a loaf. In the alchemist's hall, Karas woke with his back as one sheet of pain and sat up because he had dreamed of an open jar, and you always checked when you dreamed of an open jar. Septa Elaine had fallen asleep sitting up, which she never did. The boy who whistled had stopped. She woke to her own name. No one had spoken it. Her name had been dropped in a bucket and the echo reached her carefully, as if it had learned manners along the way. She stood and went to the door of the sept and looked out toward the river and saw nothing, which did not reassure her. Not all changes are things that can be looked at. Some are like a breath held in a giant chest. Jorel in his little boat wiped his face with both hands and then spread his hands as if warding off weather. He had the feeling of having said goodbye and not knowing to whom. He spit again because the first spit had been traditional. This one was to make his mouth his. When he licked his lips, he tasted something that was not salt and was not sweet and was not sour. He put his tongue to the roof of his mouth and felt it sting, the way it does when you bite it and pretend you did not. He looked at the water and saw the skin of it tighten and relax, as if it were gathering itself. Tom slept and woke and slept again in the time it takes a man to chew a slice of apple. He dreamed of his wife's hair pinned badly atop her head and the twist of her mouth as she scolded him for a thing she would not remember to press him about. He dreamed of walking backward and finding it to be easier than walking forward, which was untrue but felt kind. He woke when a nearby man sat up and breathed in a way that meant his lungs had learned something they wished they had not. Tom did not ask what. He sat up too. He looked toward the place where the river would be when it was day. The edge of the east had the color of old bruise. He folded his cloak under his shoulders and waited for his bones to tell him what to do. Up in the tower, Prince Viserys did not stop. He did not know if stopping was even an option once you had begun. The candle did not change color. It did not grow or shrink. It burned like a decision that has already been made and no longer requires any attention. The skull behind him saw nothing. It saw nothing very attentively. He spoke until his mouth felt as if kissed by frost, and until his lungs understood something about thin air they had refused to understand before. What came first was not visible. What came first was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of it. The city's conversation was pressed flat and then smoothed with a hand. The cicadas in the groves ceased their argument. The bells did not ring because no one pulled their ropes. Men who would have shouted thought better of it without knowing why, and the children who would have cried opened their mouths and then gave small resigned laughs instead, and allowed themselves to be distracted by bread or buttons. Then the wind went away, but the curtains moved as if something went past them anyway. A thing with shape and intent that did not require air for motion. Theomore, who had not meant to sleep and slept anyway, woke to his own choking and told himself sternly he was an old man with bad dreams. Then he rose in shame and went to the window. He opened it. The night was nothing. He had never encountered a night that had so successfully completed the sentence of itself. Along the Blackwater, the water hesitated. It had been ready for the tide to hurry it in this direction or that, and it had practiced all afternoon and evening the posture of eagerness. But now it paused. In the depths of it, something dark and unreflective gave a slight ripple, as if deciding which garment to put on. Jorel, in his small boat, began to cry in a way that would later mortify him. He could not explain the weeping. He simply felt the correct place for water to be was in his eyes, and his eyes obliged. The first visible sign was so slight that it would have been missed by any man not looking with the full concentration of grief. It was a thinning of the moon upon the water where the moon had made a clean, white ladder. The ladder's rungs went missing and then returned, and then extended too far, as if adding rungs for someone who wished to climb out of the world. Then a shading appeared not on the water but in it, and the shading did not belong to any object between moon and tide. The river developed a hinge of darker motion, and the hinge turned slowly. The hinge was a corridor. The corridor had no sides. Tom, asleep beside the ash stand, dreamed of walking in a corridor like that, whose sides were made of a word he could not read. Prince Viserys' lips were numb. He lifted his cup, and water had never tasted so ceremonial before. He set the cup down. He laid his two hands on the edge of the map where the old clerk's careful letters had labeled a broken coast. If he looked toward the candle, the wrong light made it difficult to float his thought toward the words he had just spoken. If he looked toward the window, he could see the river decide to carry a history he had asked for. Theomore's translation lay like a sleeping dog. He kept a part of his mind tidy for later, a part that would need to count days. In the camps, men woke and did not know why they woke. Her than that bad things do not like to be done to a sleeping man and prefer witnesses. They looked at the river and felt their own stomachs roll like bread that has been punched down. They did not laugh. One man began a prayer and then stopped, astonished to hear his God say his name correctly for the first time. He finished the prayer and felt suddenly foolish, as if he had forgotten a friend's birthday and made up for it with a too costly gift. The corridor in the river darkened. It was not a fog. Fog made a man wet and a little angry and then demanded that he pretend he had been brave. This was a clarity. It was the absence of reflected things. It was water persuaded to remember its own depths in the middle of its surface. It began to glide toward the place where the river would narrow and men would plant their feet and names and hopes in the mud and tell themselves the old story about battle, the one that made heroes when in fact it only made survivors and graves. Septa Elaine grabbed a boy by the shoulder as he tried to chase a dog and knew with the certainty born of 100 such grabs that she had kept him from breaking an arm he did not know was in danger. She looked toward the sky and saw nothing but the sky. She looked toward the river and saw no more than the too dark scene. And yet, the hair along her forearms stood up, and in that simple army of hairs she saw creation taking posture. In the prince's tower, the hum had turned into something with an edge and then into something with a hand. It did not touch Viserys. It did not yet. It passed by him like a person who has come into a room to examine the contents and finds that the living are less interesting than the written. It examined the maps. It stood near the skull, and the sound of an old wind traveled through the old bone, and the note it made sang very softly in the back of Viserys' teeth. He had called a thing. He would not pretend it was anything else. He did not flatter himself that he controlled it. He had pulled a rope and the thing at the other end had answered. He watched the river through the window as you watch the face of someone you have just told your secret to. He waited for the moment when his knowledge of what he had done would meet his understanding of its consequences. This always took longer than a man thinks it will. Down on the water, the seam moved. It moved toward the city at first because sleeping things are often drawn to warmth. Then it turned toward the north and a low, patient bend in the river. It did not know patience. It had no language for it. Its language was the undoing of light. It advanced as a hand slides across a table to gather crumbs. It did not stir the surface. It felt like memory cutting through a vent. Theomore stood with his hands on the sill and breathed through his mouth to see what breathing felt like when the air did not believe in itself. He thought of his chain and the men who had made it and the bits of knowledge each link represented. None of those links had prepared him for a moment when his senses told him plainly that something old had answered something new. He whispered a word that had no god attached to it. He whispered, "Please, Kara's in the Guildhall," turned the lid of a jar an increment and watched the thin line of dampness spread across his thumb and did not wipe it away. He did not know why he wanted to keep it. He only knew that this was an hour when hands behaved better if they were shown respect. He thought of the white threads and the patient jars. He hoped the prince's servants were patient. He hoped patience could be imported like lemons. Jorel put his oars in the boat and stood and spread his stance the way a man does when he knows a thing might try to throw him, and he will not let it. He whispered to Nora and thought he heard her whisper back, but that was nonsense. He laughed aloud at himself as men do when fear is too proud to use its proper name. The seam slid by his boat and it did not rock him. It did not trouble the lumps of tar in the seams of his boards. It did not steal the star that sat in the dish of a puddle at the bow. It simply passed, and as it passed, he realized his tears had dried on his face the way seawater dries on a rope, stiff and undeniable. Tom took his willow twig out of his pocket and put it into his mouth and chewed until the bitter song of it convinced his body that it was time to be awake and clever. He picked up his spear, felt foolish to pick up a spear in the dark. His fingers found their places on the shaft like birds to their thinnest perches. He wiped his thumb against his trousers and felt grit. He smiled to himself at the ordinary fact of grit. The extraordinary is easier to withstand when the ordinary is under your thumb. Prince Viserys closed his eyes. He had understood, in a flimsy scholarly way, that old whispers about shade and will were not entirely myths, because myths that survive centuries do not do so merely because they are pleasant. Men would rather cherish an unpleasant myth if it helped them sleep. He had not understood that calling a thing would make the city seem to hold its breath so obediently. He had not understood that the night would take on a new weight. He had not understood, and now he did, that power makes a house in the space where you were kind, and afterward there is less room. He put his hand upon the map. His hand covered a piece of coastline that no longer existed. He thought of his brother riding toward the river with all the bright force of someone who believes, and he thought of the men across from him believing in something no less bright but more hunger-worn. He wondered if the shade would feel the belief and feed on it or slink around it, the way a dog chooses to go around a group of drunken men because even hunger knows its own caution. He opened his eyes. The seam reached a place where the river narrowed and the ford had taught generation after generation. Of boys, the ritual of getting from one side of the world to the other without dying. The seam did not narrow with the river. It kept its width as if its width were not subject to the humor of banks. Men on both sides of it stood as if an unheard song had called them to attention. A horse shied and refused to make a spectacle of itself. A boy with his first sword to his name felt his bladder insist and then was grateful when it reconsidered. The seam slowed. It seemed to consider. Then slowly it deepened. The darkness was not a color but a substance. And as it grew denser, men had the distinct sensation that the river was being asked to hold its breath. A lily pad dipped as if someone had pushed a thumb into the water beside it. A fish, used to sudden changes and more philosophical than men about survival, turned and swam toward a new, unsuspected channel that had appeared near the bank where the reeds grew like green spears and frogs kept their patient accounts. Everything waited. In the tower, the candle burned. The skull listened. The map crinkled minutely as the air lost a fraction of its humidity. Theomore's hands were still upon the sill. Mara, who had not yet gone to bed because she had not remembered how, stood in the hallway with a full jug and the decision to set it down. She set it down. Her father had taught her that setting down a weight at the right moment was a kind of genius. Prince Viserys did a quiet, terrible thing. He smiled. Not because he was glad, not because he was cruel, not because he had forgotten what lives tasted like when they ended. He smiled because the thing he had reached for had, in fact, been there, and there is in that discovery a joy that has nothing to do with morals. He smiled because in him was a boy who had been told that the world would not be his in the way it had been his ancestors, and now the world had made a little space. He smiled and did not know whether, in years to come, he would hate himself for that curl of the mouth or whether he would tell himself he had been brave for allowing it to happen. He did not speak. He did not need to. The seam took a breath, and the river breathed with it. Then the shade began gently, the way a flood begins when the first overfamiliar drops pass their marks with the courtesy of thieves. Not today. The river seemed to murmur in a tongue it did not own. Today I am something else. Somewhere beyond the camps, far away enough that no one would know it for days. A flock of small pearl-colored birds rose from reeds all at once and wheeled and turned as if a hand had held them on a string and moved it in an invisible circle. Somewhere far in the city, a child who had been born too soon, against advice and instruction, took a first breath that startled him in its ease. The candle burned and its wrong light did not gutter. Theomore whispered again, though he would later claim it had been only a breath. Karas pressed his thumb atop the jar lid and eased it down, and the patient jar accepted the touch. Septa Elaine again told a god to sit still, because she could not help herself. Jorel steadied his feet and let the thing pass as he had let storms pass and lovers come and go. Tom chewed his willow twig and spat carefully because even in darkness men should not spit where others would step. The beginning is not the thing men tell stories about. Men prefer the middle, where the blood decides its map, or the end, when the last word finds a throat brave enough to say it. But a beginning has its own dignity. The shade moved without haste. The river remembered with sudden intimacy that it had been God in the mouths of old men. The city listened as it had not listened in a century. The prince stood with a hand upon a continent that did not exist and another hand upon a table that did, and both hands felt equally real. The debt would be counted later. The favor would be paid in days. The river would not be the only thing that changed its course. For now the candle burned, and the skull watched, and outside the tower the night leaned in, intent, as if pressing its ear to a crack in the world and waiting, patiently, for the next word.